Thank you. So thanks for having me. So as you can see, I'm also giving a talk. I'm giving a talk mostly for Elio Herta, who can't make it, so he gave me slides, and I'm going to give the talk. So this is about work that's done at the NCSA by the gravity group there, where we are trying to look at different aspects of how to use blue waters to do some science tests to do with gravitational waves, not necessarily always the typical stuff, but to try and see what you can do with more alternative, well, not alternative, but more unusual things of using the computer. Right, so basically the idea is to give you trends in what you can do with simulation and data-driven science. What can you do if you have lots of data? How do you parse this? In our case, this might be data that comes from the LIGO detector. Can you handle this in something like blue waters? What kind of extra science can you do with this? How can you use other facilities or blue waters to work with this type of data that you hadn't thought of before? Right, so one thing to do is to think about what you can do if you would like to, does this work? If you would like to take an HPC system such as blue waters, check when it's idle and see if you can use some of the idle cycles that it has for a more high throughput type of computation, such as what LIGO is doing. So that's some type of scavenging of cycles, which would make it possible to use blue waters more efficiently, but also blue waters is large enough that even a small fraction of its computational capacity is large for something like LIGO. Right, so there's two case studies that I'm going to present. One is how to use blue waters for the discovery of neutron stars by LIGO. Have been living under a rock or something similar. This is LIGO, this is Virgo. These guys have detected gravitational waves, and those three persons have won the Nobel Prize for it. If you, however, look at the data that LIGO actually measures, it's that red stuff, and the gravitational wave signal you want to see is that blue that you can't probably see. But it's much lower than the noise, so you can't just look for it. You need to have some computer to dig for it. The typical way that this is done right now is by something called matched filtering, which basically computes a correlation between your predicted signal and the measured one, and the high correlation means just a signal that's not. This thing is trivially parallelizable, just parallelize over all the possible predictions, but it's also computationally intensive because the more predictions you have, the more search you have to do. So it's something that's really hard to do. So LIGO right now runs its own LIGO data grid, which has about 9 clusters, 17,000 cores spread out all over the world. Most of it, I guess, somewhere at the AI and at the LIGO sites, and there's something in Syracuse as well. And that's what's currently done. And there have been efforts to use other systems for that, to hook it up to the Open Science Grid and Exceed in 2015. And we've done something similar with blue waters, where we've used it to look for neutron stars during the last observation run 02 at NCSA. Right. So the idea there is essentially that you somehow make the compute nodes of blue waters available to LIGO's data grid by going to something that's called the Open Science Grid. So that's initially developed for high energy particle physics, actually, where you can use resources on high-performance machines for these type of high-throughput computations. So that's something that's well established, so we can leverage the infrastructure that exists. And by doing so, you can really make this work. You can have a pilot job that starts on blue waters, asks for data from LIGO, gets sent the data, you process the data, and then you report back the results to LIGO, and you use this OSG-type infrastructure to handle where to schedule jobs, how soon to schedule the jobs, and how to move the data back and forth. The issue that you run into with this is that LIGO and most other workflows like this have a fairly well-defined software stack that they want. They don't typically want to run on blue waters. They have their own operating system software that they would like, which we don't offer. So what one does there is one uses what's called Shifter, which is a containerization software for blue waters and other trace systems. So basically you can run a Docker image on blue waters, and that allows you to swap out pretty much all the software that you have. The only thing that you still share with the remainder of blue waters is the kernel. So in that sense, then you can swap out all of the system software, run it on blue waters, and get exactly the version of the software that you want. So that's done here. This is kind of a classical example, but it doesn't stop there. So you can also run MPI executables that way. So if you have a very fancy MPI code that wants particular libraries, suppose you want to have Python from yesterday, and other stuff, you can put it in a container, you can run it in parallel, And this will work much easier. We've compiled TensorFlow that way, and it's a thing that you do in an afternoon rather than a week. So this is something that you can do if you have a system that is harder to compile in Blue Waters because of software requirements. And well, we were lucky we had set that up, and a little bit later, LIGO detected 2 neutron stars, and this would be a movie if this wasn't a PDF file. But I guess you've seen merging neutron stars quite a number by now. So these are merging neutron stars, visualized by Rob Cisneros, who is in the room. So you can ask him to do the same thing for you if you ever have something, of course. And so we put that in, put it into the OSG network, and this is basically a particular day during the search for gravitational waves by LIGO, and this is Blue Waters. So it's not the largest contributor at this particular day, but it is a significant contributor there. And it's something that essentially came out of the idle nodes on Blue Waters. So for that, it's really useful. So that's one way to make use of Blue Waters for things that it wasn't used before, make sure that the system is better used, and also LIGO would like that, because Blue Waters dwarfs pretty much everything that LIGO has. LIGO had 17,000 cores. Blue Waters has a couple 100,000. So on the other hand, this is kind of a sledgehammer approach. We just take the old method, we just pour more cores at it, and we hope everything works. Another idea is be more clever what you're doing. Instead of taking this method which scales but isn't particularly fast in some sense, and also has the problem that in principle we have a 9-dimensional parameter space. We currently probe only 4 of those because we can't afford to generate more templates. So this is all really hard to do. So maybe a better way of doing this is not to pour more computer power at it, but to pour more brain power at it in some sense. So what one can do there is to take a slide, in this case from NVIDIA, so that's why the colors are greenish here. You look at what CPU power does, that's almost certainly a single core, and you see the GPUs are getting much faster, so maybe if we can use these guys here better, we can get faster results. And we are not alone. There's clearly a drive towards this. There's lots of money invested in there. So if we can leverage some of those efforts, we can get results hopefully faster. We don't have to do everything on our own. The other thing that happened was that in the 2010s, this whole deep learning field became really, really active, and people are trying to use that for lots of different things after it has been sitting there for quite a while. Now you have computers that are fast enough to actually drive these complicated neural networks, and you can use them to look for very noisy for signals in very noisy data. So normally you would think you look for street signs out of a car, but you can do the same type of data and look for LIGO signals in LIGO data, which is also just noisy. So the idea is that you have kind of each of these nodes are mathematical operations that take their input, combine them in some way, and produce output. And you would feed a first layer with your input data. You have a couple of computing layers in between, and then you've got an output layer. So the deep in the neural networks means you have lots and lots of those, and then you have lots and lots of ways to combine the data, and the art is to find weights for the combination to get you the output that you're looking for. And that works really well. Nobody quite knows why, but it works really well. So that's what one wants to do, and this is something that's really cheap to do, and for which you can get dedicated hardware. And the nice thing is that you can separate out the training phase, which is computationally expensive, from the phase where you just feed data, you get the output. So that phase is much cheaper. So you can put more effort in the training, and then the evaluation is cheaper, versus the matched filtering is as expensive the first time as the 100 millionth time. Right, so why do we want to do this to some extent? This is what the actual neutron star signal looked like in LIGO when you look at it. If it was clean, it would be this chirp here, but there's this gigantic yellow spike here, which is a glitch that happened at the same time as the signal went through LIGO. So instead of having a nice signal, you've got this gigantic glitch, and what's currently done with LIGO would not be able to see the signal right away. So it's not lost. There's still a flag that comes up from the other detector, which didn't have a glitch at the same time, but it required a human to look at this and say, yeah, that's probably right. And then you spend a couple more days or weeks until you have figured that out properly. And the neural networks happen to be able to look at this signal and still say there's a gravitational wave in there, and they still give you the right mass. So you can still get a reliable trigger from this and then do your work afterwards. You can still go back and model this, of course. They'll tell you what you've seen. You can then take your glitch model. You can take your old method of match filtering and check that the answer is right. But they will give you a trigger more quickly. So that's what you could have done here, and then you can, in the end, actually do this data analysis in LIGO in real time. just because it happens to be efficient enough that this actually works out for you. So that's the idea. And the trick there was to think a little bit out of the box. So neural networks were often used for just image analysis. That's what you would associate with them. So you can use them for science. They were used for astronomy. So here the idea is then to go away, not think about using pixels, don't take images, but really just take the data stream, the 1D data stream, and feed it to the network. Don't go through something that looks like an image. Don't make a spectrogram and feed it a spectrogram. Just take the raw data, that's all the information, and see how well that works. And that works well, and in fact it worked well enough that we could make a model that can detect binary black holes merging, just taking the masses as parameters, so that's a toy problem in some sense, and train that on a laptop of a student, and then run it with the actual LIGO signal and detect all the gravitational wave signals that LIGO has found in its own data stream. So we train it on artificial data on a laptop, and then we feed it the actual data, and it works. And that's quite impressive that even though we feed it on something that's very clean, it can handle very noisy signals. And if you do the math and you check how well does it work, this is a comparison between your detection accuracy for matched filtering and this neural network called deep filtering. So you can see that the red and the blue are basically on top of each other. So there's not much of a difference in efficiency, in particular if you go to something like signal-to-noise ratio of 6, where LIGO becomes interested. Stuff down there, they don't care so much because they're not so sure if it's real. But once you're at the range where LIGO actually would detect the signal anyway, you're about as good. You're much faster, so if you take just the first two lines where you compare the same CPU, then you see by going from matched filtering to this deep neural network, you get a speed up of maybe a factor of 150. And that's a fair comparison because you're comparing the same CPU, you just take a different algorithm. So that's the speed that we get from just the algorithm. That's much better. You can then push it a bit. You can actually go to GPUs. And there the comparison is a little bit less fair because this CPU costs you $300 and it's a laptop CPU. And this is some mid-range gaming CPU. So that probably burns a bit more power. This is 15 watts. This probably has 60 watts. But I looked up what an equivalently expensive CPU would provide me with, because I know the audience here, and that might be a factor of 3 faster. So you're going from here to maybe here. It's still going to beat you. And it's going to be more power efficient at that point, because that CPU would have 100 watts, and this has maybe 60 watts. So that's basically the idea, and that seems to have worked unexpectedly well. It also gives you some benefits of neural networks. So neural networks tend to be good at generalizing signals. So you can train it with just a non-spinning signal, then you can feed it in this case, an eccentric signal. So this is not two black holes on circular orbits, but they are on very eccentric orbits. And it still finds it. So it has somehow learned that you don't have to have something that's a pure sinusoid, but it can have these extra wiggles, and it's still a black hole. And we haven't trained it with these eccentric signals. It's just finding them. So you can always say this is a false positive, but you can always take the answers that it has, run your favorite match filtering algorithm over it, and then check that the answer is right. So you're not losing anything. You can always just use it as a trigger, which is cheaper than what you currently do. Right, and that's basically it. We fed it various signals. So all of these things that look like this are all signals that it can actually find, and they're proper LIGO signals. And in conclusion, so we've used Blue Waters to detect signals in LIGO with just a match filtering method, scavenging some of its cycles, but also to use neural networks to look for gravitational waves. And for this, we'll want to use Blue Waters in the future, because right now we trained it on a laptop of a student, but that's for 1 parameter space. If we go to 4 or 9 parameter spaces, then the training will take longer. So the training gets more expensive. The evaluation afterwards, not so much. The neural network gets bigger, but not in the same way that the parameter space gets bigger. So a 9-dimensional parameter space that you're searching for is not going to give you a neural network that's by the same order of magnitude larger. It will probably be, maybe it's 10 times larger, but it's not, whatever, 10 parameter points in each dimension to the 9th power larger. So we should win, but we have to train it. And for training, we probably need something like Blue Waters, because the training will be slow, because the training has to do the same thing as match filtering does. It has to train over lots and lots of sample points. Right. That's it. Thank you.